And also, quite interestingly, a number of these schools, of the schools that I'm familiar with there, they've really sort of involved students with disabilities right into the mainstream of the school. Now, that I should just say a word or two about that, because that has struck me as being extremely powerful. There is specialist provision for students with a disability inside the school, and the school has often sought additional funding to have that sort of specific support. But these youngsters are part and parcel of the sort of the fabric and the community of the school. So you will find youngsters in wheelchairs, you know, sort of in the corridor at break time and at lunchtime. And over time, the impact of that on the culture and the expectations of the other youngsters is actually quite powerful, because they see their disability as being part and parcel of their daily experience, you know, and that sort of cultural impact over time has seemed to be, you know, highly effective. And then the final one is about building leadership capacity. Yes, we've talked about the quality of leadership and the types of earlier. Really, we've also found that these schools tend to have quite large principal teams, which are sort of fairly flat in structure. I know a number of you have as well. Notions of distributed leadership throughout the school, but with the caveat that the head is still pretty hands-on. And we're also finding that as these schools take on more of a systemic role, where the heads and the senior team are supporting other schools, then the notion of distributed leadership is you know, increasingly important. So those two headings, leadership and inclusion. So I'd like you to reflect upon that now, write something down, give yourself a RAG rating, and then we'll try and pull some of this together in the second part of the morning. And in many ways, although we haven't talked about it a lot here this morning, as these schools continue to transform and as standards begin to sort of really rise, and the transformations become, you know, sustainable and embedded, the focus tends to move fairly quickly from teaching on to learning. All right? So at the early phases, when you're trying to establish a fairly orderly environment, the focus has to be on teaching consistency. You know, later on, the focus becomes on a richer repertoire of teaching strategies, which actually impact upon learning in the way that you both have just been talking about. Come on to that a bit more this afternoon, because I think it's a really sort of vital issue if we want to continue the transformation. Because in many ways, I'm just going to come back to this in a second. In many ways, you know, we've dealt with the first phase, how do you actually transform? The next phase is about sustaining excellence, and you know, that's just the list, that list of things. There's a lot more detail underpinning each of those. We won't go into a discussion about that today. But the continually developing teaching and learning is about putting the emphasis much more on learning and making that much higher profile inside the school, having established the regularities of teaching and the consistency of teaching practice in the initial phases. But again, I would like to talk a bit more about pedagogy and learning this afternoon, because I think that's worth taking a bit more time to do. Let me try and stay then for a moment with this with the narrative. We've been through now the 8 dimensions, and you know, from what I'm gathering, that I'm getting a sense that they resonate reasonably well. That you seem to think that they're pretty important building blocks. The trick, of course, is not dealing with them individually, but to see how they come together. You know, how they're molded together in the context of your own individual school. And that is the achievement of leadership, it seems to me. It's not about taking one and the other, it's about linking them together in response to the uniqueness of the culture of the school. And certainly my cut on this is that, you know, the types of leadership strategies are about I'm just in a sense reiterating what I've been saying already. This is a summary really of what I said already. Developing a narrative, which we talked about, unrelenting focus on teaching and then learning. Explicitly organizing the school for improvement. So you're building the organizational conditions inside the school to support these new ways of working.